Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fifth meeting of the South Frederick Corridors Scoping Group. I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. Before we start today, I just wanted to see if anyone has any questions or things they wanted to share or discuss with the group. Or should I just be grateful they all even showed up, given the visceral shock of being back to work on a Monday after a holiday. But does anyone have anything they wanted to kind of discuss before we kicked off the meeting? No? Okay, that's okay. All right, so I just want to repeat some of the fundamentals here. As usual, we're live streaming this meeting on publicinput.com, and you can listen there, leave a voice message, or enter a queue to provide live comment. And we can also get to that through www.frederickcountymd.gov/8141. And as we usually do, we're going to stop at the end of the meeting to take public comment. And also, you all know this already, but just as a reminder, keep yourself muted. If you want to say anything, don't worry about raising your hand. Just jump right in. Okay, so at our last meeting, we learned about the parole redevelopment plan outside of Annapolis. And today we're going to take a look at Columbia Town Center in Columbia, Maryland, the Mosaic Project in Fairfax, Virginia, and then time allowing, we may talk about the Meriden Green Project in Meriden, Connecticut. So I'm actually just going to hand this off to Dennis Suprzinski, who is our exceptional and outstanding colleague in the Livable Frederick office. And then time permitting, I'll jump in at the end. So Dennis, take it away.
Excellent. Can you all hear me okay? Am I coming through? Audio okay? Yeah, okay, good. Wasn't sure, wouldn't get any feedback, so I wasn't sure. I'm gonna run through both of these presentations. The one for Columbia, Maryland is probably a little more appropriate for our particular uses because of, for a couple of reasons. One, Columbia is made up of multiple land holdings. The Mosaic District, which we're going to look at in Northern Virginia a little bit later, is essentially a single owner project, relatively small scale, and it's entirely appropriate for our planning area because we have some large, landholders within the planning area, and we can certainly look at it from that perspective, as well as from kind of the design orientation. Some of the lessons learned in that Virginia project might be applicable to what we're doing as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if you guys are seeing anything.
Yep.
You see it? Good. Wow. Technology working. Okay, so here we go. Columbia, Maryland. I'm assuming that most, if not all of you, know where Columbia is and have probably been there. But if you haven't, we'll go ahead and kind of give you some orientation just so that you can kind of understand the planning context as well as kind of the physical geography of Columbia. So as you may be aware, Howard County is nestled snugly between Baltimore County and Montgomery County. We actually share a very, very, very tiny border with Howard County at the point where it comes together with Carroll and Montgomery. So interesting factoid to throw on your Trivial Pursuits nights. The idea for Columbia was probably a no-brainer in the post-war years, given the fact that the area that we're looking at is located roughly between Baltimore and Washington. And that was an attractor to James Rouse, who, when working on a project in the city of Baltimore in the early 1960s, kind of cast an eye to this location and noted that it might be interesting to develop a complete city from scratch, from the ground up, as opposed to kind of doing what he was known for and what he became known for, and probably will always be known for, are his redevelopment projects, such as Faneuil Hall in Boston, and Inner Harbor in Baltimore, and others. So Mr. Rouse kind of worked his magic and developed a plan and a concept for a complete city, and he used that phrase a lot. He used words like real city, complete city, because if you think of it, in the early 1960s, suburbia was underway, and a lot of what was being built in the United States was fundamentally focused on residential development, and in most cases divorced from any kind of employment or retail services. So his idea was, hey, let's start from scratch. Let's do it right. Nobody has used, up until that point, nobody had been using zoning in a progressive way. It was basically being used to let you know what your neighbors couldn't do, as opposed to what you could do in your community. And he was keenly aware of that fact. So here's a kind of a brief timeline. Early 60s, he gets this German idea for this new kind of city, or a new town. He makes his first purchase in 1962 of a single parcel out of the 140 that would come to make up the entire town of Columbia, city of Columbia. We're looking at a scale here for the entirety of Columbia at 14,000 plus acres. So we're not really going to look at the entirety of Columbia. We're going to really concentrate on the Columbia town center area. But in terms of the history, this is kind of where we are. The public announcement of the project was made in 1963. And for those of you who are planner geeks, and I'm not sure that any of you would have been cognizant at the time, but leading up to the announcement, there was a lot of talk and rumor about who was buying up these properties. And of course, he did it like any good, massive land aggregator. He had to do it through a series of holding companies and kind of secret shadow buyers. But after a while, farmers talk. And so, some of the early concepts were that it was going to be Disney, that it was going to be like a Disneyland thing on the East Coast. A lot of people, given the era, were thinking it's the Soviets. The Soviets are buying up land, and they're going to use it for some kind of nefarious, evil plan involving millions of dollars. So that wasn't the case. It was actually James Rouse putting together this project for Columbia. The first actual, shovel in the ground was the two lakes that were excavated, Lake Wild and the other one, which I can't remember the name of, but shows up later in the presentation. He excavated those lakes, kind of put those in first. So, put in major amenities before doing anything in this area. And that kind of let people know that the project was underway. Probably also served as his stormwater management device. So that was convenient. 1967, a year later, Columbia officially opens with some of the first neighborhoods and villages kind of getting their first homes. The road network starting. 1971, Columbia Mall opens. That was a big deal. Jim Rouse kind of looked at the Columbia Mall not necessarily as a mall in the way that we think of it, but as more of a collective point of meeting for people in the community. So, even though we kind of maybe have a slightly jaundiced view of malls now, 50, 60 years later, at the time, the idea for that mall really made sense in terms of Rouse's plan for this kind of livable community. 1990, the last of the 9 villages were established. Now, Columbia is organized around 9 villages and neighborhoods, and the last of those villages were established in 1990. In 2010, the Downtown Columbia Plan came into effect. And so here you can see an early pencil rendering, and man, I love these kinds of renderings with pencils like this. This is just so beautiful. I want to hang these on my wall. And if you visited my house, you'd note that I do actually have things like this on my wall. But, organized around these 9 villages, each of the neighborhood centers, each of the villages had 2 or 5, between 2 and 5 neighborhood centers. So it's very well thought out. If you've been to Columbia, as a young driver, perhaps when you're 16 or 17, it's a little difficult to get around. It's very suburban. You're winding around forested lands. There's not a lot of signage. Trying to find your way in Columbia is a little rough unless you know where you're going. But the organizational structure is very sound. And this town center, again, was to serve as this hub of the new community. His idea of this complete city, a big part of that for Rouse was jobs. He really wanted to make sure that this was an economic center as much as a residential place. He did not want it to end up being a commuter suburb. His idea of placing it between Baltimore and Washington was more of a way to take advantage of the economic engine or engines that we had in place at the time. And he had very much a concentrated focus on social equity and green spaces, which is something else that you might recognize. This is kind of funny going back to these old land use plans. Here are the 8 basic uses of the land. And he kind of describes in this plan, like, high density, medium density, low density. It's very suburban. It's very conventional, very traditional. It's how he mixed it up and how he blended it that makes it a little more important. His goals, were not necessarily only to make money, though, I'm sure he did very well. But he had a lot of good ideas. Notice the first goal on this list. You probably can't read it on your screen. The first goal was Columbia would not create an additional tax burden on residents of the county. So you can see him standing basically at gunpoint next to the county commissioners at the time saying, you cannot cost us a damn cent. If you're going to come in here and do this, you cannot throw the costs on the rest of the county. That's kind of interesting that was kind of came up first. So here you go. Here's like an overall look at Columbia itself. And what we're going to look at a little more detail is the town center. It was called the town center at the time. Now they call it the downtown Columbia. And it's, obviously a subset of the larger area. It's a neighborhood unto itself. But within the city center, within the town center, there are distinct neighborhoods as well. And we'll take a look at each of those as we move along here. The plan for just the town center area is about 400 acres. And you compare that to our planning area. And thank you, John, for giving me those acreage numbers. I don't know why I keep forgetting the acreage on South Frederick corridors, but I always forget what it is. But we're looking at about 5,000 acres for the entire planning area in South Frederick. If you break that down between Ballinger Creek East and South, and our 2 corridor areas at 85 and 355, you still end up with units of land like on the order of 2,000 acres. So keep that in mind when we're looking at this project at a little over 400 acres in size. So this plan, this downtown Columbia plan, was actually established in 2010, and then again amended in 2016. So prior to this, they were working off the general plan in Howard County, working off the initial kind of birthing documents for the city of Columbia. But now downtown area has its own plan, and it is being implemented as we speak. So the downtown plan covers, of course, just the downtown area. It's a 30-year plan. It includes new street system, new pedestrian, bicycle network, cultural and civic amenities, open spaces. Everything that Rouse kind of proclaimed at the time is being done kind of in spades in the downtown Columbia plan. Ultimately, over 4 million square feet of office space, 6,200 residential units, 1.25 million square feet of retail and restaurants, major hotel and conference facilities. And, some of this is already developed. There's a mall, that counts kind of against the retail and restaurants that are already out there. But what's important to understand is that while some of the uses that were built since 1967 will remain in place, there's some office structures, for instance, some of the mall structure, some of the homes will remain. A lot of the buildings are finding new life through redevelopment and reuse. And so you'll see that theme kind of popping up throughout the plan and throughout its implementation. Kind of a side note, but maybe important to what we're talking about, there's also dedicated funding for affordable housing. that is paid for on a per annum basis. And I can't remember the precise number, but I want to say it's kind of a nickel per square foot of commercial, leasable commercial space. So it's not an outstanding amount of money, but it does actually help to fund some affordable housing actions within the town center area. And there's also a fair amount of public art. You know, you get mixed reviews on public art depending on your audience, depending on who you're talking to. What I try to say to people who are a little more cynical about public art is that you can think of it as an identifier. You think of it as part of a wayfinding system. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, modern sculpture of a nude in your downtown plaza. It can be done in an interesting and innovative way to help people ground themselves, to understand where they are, and to make a place to differentiate it kind of in the marketplace, which I think is the goal of any place making. Here's a nice aerial, sorry.
Dennis, before we go any further, I'd also like to note that the mall in Columbia and the surrounding areas captured in the plan are the primary focus of the transit systems that meet and transfer in Howard County. So both the RTA and the MTA do transfer here.
So to that point, I mean, I don't know if you're going to get to this, Dennis, later, or maybe now is a good time to talk about it. But I know I've had a couple of people who in the Columbia area, as compared to Frederick, felt that the Columbia area was definitely designed to be car-centric, and that the bicycle are now kind of almost becoming an afterthought, and there's some real challenges of getting around that. Most people seem to feel more comfortable driving around by car to get to the location rather than to walk and drive or bike. And I don't know if that's changed as compared to what I heard a few years ago about this.
It appears to be changing, I should say, probably more aggressively than in Frederick County right now. You know, I think I have a slide a little bit later on that talks about it, but, you know, in the town center area, they're concentrating on dedicated bike lanes and sharrows and other devices to kind of move people on bicycle. It is notable, I think it's like 100 bike share bicycles in the downtown area, mostly in the kind of the office core and the mall area. I think about a third of them are electric bikes as well. So I think the efforts are underway to kind of make this a better area. I think they have more flexibility in this downtown core than they do in the rest of Columbia. And I completely agree. It is absolutely a place of its time. And it's going to take a lot of work over many decades to really make significant change in that, not the least of which is obviously the culture and the behavior end of this. But, you know, in terms of the facilities throughout the town, it's going to be a challenge for folks. But they do seem to be making headway in the town center, and they're very vocal about it and very upfront about the challenges that they have. And that includes and spans over into the pedestrian era as well. And we'll get to a slide later that talks about that more specifically. I do want to kind of touch on Howard County in terms of its overall context demographically. You know, they're pretty close to Frederick County when you kind of look at things by the numbers. A little more populous than we are, a little over 300,000. You know, fairly highly educated, a good employment area, good employment base, 208,000 jobs. This data is a couple of years old, so these are all probably a little bit higher. Slightly fewer people over the age of 55. Median household income is pretty high. You know, so you kind of get a sense of the marketplace again. Very interestingly, one of the neighborhoods known as the Lakefront, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, there is a development company that is concentrating its efforts on redeveloping the Lakefront area. And they're redeveloping it as a wellness center. Is kind of that's kind of the theming they're giving it. So it's going to have a lot of emphasis on walking, bicycling, general mental and medical well-being as well. But these are some statistics they pulled together. You know, the population of this area, about 55% of the county lives in and around, you know, Columbia. This is Columbia-wide, by the way. Their density, you have a 2,300 per square mile, age, 65 and older. They're basically showing that they have a generally younger crowd in and around Columbia, and this idea of the kind of the wellness village or the wellness area probably worked pretty well for them. In terms of the zoning, I want to touch on zoning because obviously it's a big part of what we do in terms of regulating land use in Maryland. The zoning district is a single district in the town center, and it's called the Newtown District. So when they established Columbia originally, basically they laid down one zoning district on most of the land. I don't think it was on all of it. And that remains to this day in terms of the town center area. Town center is in this kind of pukey lime green color because of an overlay button I accidentally hit on the screen. But you can kind of get a sense of it.
Hey Dennis?
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Is the Newtown District, is the Columbia Town Center the only place in Howard County where the Newtown District is applied? Or do they use that district elsewhere as well?
It's used throughout Columbia. So it's used throughout, I wish I had the overall zoning map. It's used throughout Columbia itself. The town center has it. I'm not sure if they've used it outside. I kind of glanced through their long-range planning document, and I recall that they were going to use it along one of their corridor areas, but I didn't follow up on that, so I'm not positive. Some of the wording implies that it is used elsewhere, like in the zoning itself, but I don't know if that was just kind of a preemptive strike to make sure that if it was used again, they could utilize it. For anybody who's on the call right now who is in the development community, I'm sure you both love and hate these kinds of things. This is the land development review process, kind of in a nutshell. It makes our process in Frederick County kind of look a little more simplified, a little more streamlined, but in terms of its complexity, it's not overly complex. There's an extra step involved in doing development in the Newtown District in Columbia, and that involves the submittal of something called a kind of concept or a comprehensive draft plan or a comprehensive land plan. And it's basically something that we in Frederick County have accomplished through an informal conversation or a pre-application meeting, but they've formalized it in Columbia. But after that, the zoning kind of works like it would in many places. The downtown area in Columbia is made up of these 7 neighborhoods. Makes sense. 400 acres is a big area. Again, kind of dwarfed by what we're looking at, but breaking these things down into manageable components makes sense both from a planning standpoint and from an implementation standpoint. Stephen Wright used to say, God invented time because otherwise everything would all happen at once. And if you think about it in terms of doing planning and implementation, you absolutely have to have priorities. You have to have manageable pieces that you can look at to kind of manage ongoing development. And probably most importantly is the ability to be flexible to that particular neighborhood's needs. And you see that reflected in the individual plans for these neighborhoods. And I can't remember if I have a slide of this or not, but each of these neighborhoods, or at least 5 of the 7, have their own individual kind of micro plans, little mini plans that talk about design elements, that talk about implementation in a little better detail. Some of the things that come through in that downtown Columbia plan, they have a street framework diagram. And I think this is something that's going to be very important to us in the South Frederick corridors area, at least in some of the key areas. I think it's really important that we look at this street framework. So here you're working with an existing mall that is being partially redeveloped in the kind of center of the town center. So right out of the box, you're looking at a lot of field parking, a lot of surface parking. But that doesn't stop at the mall property. It actually spreads into the surrounding areas around Little Patuxent Parkway, which you can kind of see in that that dark hunter green. So establishing a street network allows for the community as a whole to plan in a logical way moving forward in terms of movement. And it can mean cars, it can mean, microbuses, it can mean bicycles. pedestrians, but it's really critical that you look at this at the outset when you're looking at an area that is ripe for redevelopment or infill, because if you don't, you're going to end up with a project that might be a wonderful project, kind of inadvertently kind of blocking the access perhaps to the next project down the line, or doing something that might not be in the best interest of the whole area. And they've divided it here into kind of a primary network and a secondary network, and even like kind of a tertiary network. And they have their parkways, boulevards, avenues, and streets. They think of it in those terms. Just smart thing to do, and it's something I think we need to seriously consider as we move forward with our plan. And here you can kind of see some of the conceptualizations for how they're dealing with street redevelopment, new streets. They're trying to think through how you move bicycles, pedestrians, microtransit, and motor vehicles simultaneously on streets and boulevards within the center. And they have nice diagrams in the plan that kind of describe that approach, which I think is a valuable approach, as well as these kind of street sections, so you can kind of see the street relative to the built environment around it, something I think also that we can learn from in looking forward to plans for the South Frederick corridors area. So here's another one, ownership diagrams. My very first job, I had to develop an ownership diagram for a village called Kennedyville, Maryland in Kent County. It's a little tiny place that maybe soaking wet is about 20 acres, if that. And my boss said, go make an ownership diagram. I'm like, what the hell? Like, what are we going to learn from an ownership diagram? Well, as it turns out, you learn a lot by looking at who owns the property. Those are the folks that are going to make things happen. And it is one of the key factors in looking at phasing or implementation of a plan. Ownership is critical. Who is willing to move? Who has the ability to move and do something? Who wants to do something? And this plays into timing as well. What is the timing? And sometimes that's related to the ownership patterns. Geographical relationships, that's another factor that you absolutely have to think about in terms of plan phasing. It's, you have $1,000 to invest in interior projects in your house over the next 2 years. You spread them all over your house, a $10 can of paint in the bedroom or whatever, or do you kind of concentrate those $1,000 like in one room and kind of go big or relatively big? Same thing with these plans. Those geographical relationships make you consider where the best move is in terms of taking the next step, particularly on the public side when you're considering public amenities or infrastructure funding. Those things are critical. What infrastructure or amenity will actually serve as a bridge to the next redevelopment project, or perhaps as an anchor or as a catalyst? Bicycle and pedestrian circulation is looked at broadly in the plan for downtown Columbia. It identifies, primary bicycle routes, pedestrian streets, crossing points, which are obviously a big factor, as well as interruptions in the network, because there are some, great 1960s era parkways here that are very difficult to cross in the best of conditions. So they're looking at the best ways to make those connections work so that they can have a cohesive downtown area. There's a pedestrian bridge now over Route 29, which I think is this green arrow over here. So they're thinking through connecting some of the other neighborhoods and villages into the town center and eliminating some of those physical barriers. The amenity and open space diagram kind of really breaks down parks, plazas, playgrounds, greens, the network connections between those places. And they break it down further into kind of those owned and controlled by the major landowners, like private public spaces, as well as those places owned by the public entity, which in this case is Howard County. And that's a nice way to break it down because it's important in an area where you already have a lot of open space that's privately controlled to at least have the opportunity to coordinate that with the public improvements. And again, I think we need to be ahead of the curve on that in South Frederick as well, because I'm sure we will end up with both. One very critical thing that comes across in their plan is consideration of how this town center works as an actual place. You know, and they do this graphically. They do it with kind of very direct language as well. The downtown revitalization is not simply a collection of individual projects. It's really a whole, and each of those projects has to add something to that whole and do it in a way that kind of enhances the overall community. And you have this nice diagram that kind of shows basically a stroll from the western end of the downtown all the way down to the lakefront, and it kind of identifies points in between. And it's indoor and outdoor because it kind of goes through the mall, which is, you know, kind of funny, but it's also, you know, entirely real. I mean, that's how, if I had to go from the western end down to the lake, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm going through the mall. I'm not going to walk around it. Makes a lot of sense. There's some of the public art. And again, I put this one up there because it's part wayfinding, it's part placemaking, it's part just, you know, dead on art to kind of create a nicer environment for folks. Doesn't have to be crazy, doesn't have to be weird, can very much help anchor people in their environments. So how is the plan working out for Columbia? So the plan was 2010, and you can see in this on the left, you're looking eastward. On the bottom of that image are some of the new residential and mixed-use projects. Kind of in the center of the image is the mall area, and on the top of the image near the lake, Kittamakundi, is the lakefront area. And that lakefront area is hugely popular for development and redevelopment right now. There's a lot of it going on. This image on the right is a rendering, in case you couldn't guess, from the perfect lighting, probably taken about an hour and a half prior to sunset, which seems to come through in every architectural rendering ever made. But here you can see in the center of that image, if it's visible to you, there's the lakefront park. There's kind of a waterfront feature over here, and you can kind of see it over here in the upper part of the photograph. It's popular. It's a place for outdoor concerts and events, and a place for people to collect. And as this area begins to redevelop even more, it's becoming even more popular. So this Warfield area is the kind of the far neighborhood in the far western neighborhood in the downtown area. It's kind of west of the mall. It includes a lot of the mall parking lot, interestingly. It's more of a traditional mixed-use neighborhood, a lot of residential, some retail, restaurants, neighborhood services on the first level. The first new residential units went up in 2014. And those were 817 rental units in these 3 separate projects, which include the Metropolitan, 10M, and M flats. And they all hit slightly different markets. I think the flats are kind of the, relatively speaking, the lower end of the 3, if my memory serves me correctly. There was a park amenity built into this, the storefront retail, if you can see my little red dot down here, bouncing ball. There's about 40,000 square feet of retail and restaurant uses. And I think from our perspective, again, in the South Frederick area, the parking is structured and it's wrapped by the actual building uses. I think they call this Texas style building, where you basically have the parking, interior structured parking, but it's pretty much invisible to the outside of the building because it's kind of locked inside, like the hole of the donut. You filled in the hole of the donut with parking and cars. That's kind of what you're looking at.
Dennis, were there thought given for each of the different areas about what the guidance would be for parking spaces in some high density area? You're trying to encourage people to maybe get away from cars and use buses or other alternative transportations, or are they fixed? You don't have the flexibility to go ahead and make development that might actually encourage that kind of behavior.
Well, I guess there's a couple ways to look at it. From the standpoint of the plan, what they say, again, pretty directly is we're going to do 2 things in terms of vehicular parking. And this is 2010 talking. We're going to do two things. One, we're going to eliminate as much surface parking as possible so that we can free it up for redevelopment. And they are doing that. That's actually happening. The second thing is they wanted to increase overall vehicular parking in the downtown area, perhaps not at the same rate if you measured it like in the era of the mall. So you might have fewer per capita or per square foot parking spaces, but it still amount to a net increase. My guess, though, with the structured parking is that leaves them this huge amount of wiggle room to further redevelop those structured areas. You know, the Texas-style parking decks, not too difficult to look at those and just understand them to be, building square footage that can be redeveloped, 20 years from now or 10 years from now. I would say that overall, the idea of putting a concentration and a density of this level close to places where you can actually walk to a grocery store, walk to work, walk to the bank, where you can do all of this on foot is like the biggest, I call it a baby step, but it's not really a baby step. It's a huge grown-up big boy and big girl step, because you're taking the opportunity to do multiple things without having to get in the car, or perhaps with making a single trip in a vehicle, which is kind of, that's the fallback position, right? Can't keep somebody out of the car. At the very least, we can keep them from leapfrogging from trip to trip to trip, from errand to errand to errand. And I think they are accomplishing that with this kind of development. And they do talk about it in the plan. Even in 2010, they're talking about the environmental damages with the vehicular network. But at the end of the day, it's still Columbia, and they still have a significant amount of retail and office space that has to be parked, at least in the near future, like in the next 10 to 15 years. But they are, the idea of circulator bus, and Jamie might have more information on this. The idea that transit is a viable part of this project is baked in. There's a transit center that is developing on the southern neighborhood. It's relatively centralized to the downtown core. They're taking that seriously. That actually comes along with 200 residential units immediately adjacent or above it. So, they're really kind of putting their money where their mouths are in terms of that element. But I don't disagree that, there's more that they could do to really make it more difficult to drive. I think part of that is, they're allowing a lot of copious on-street parking, slow down traffic. They're doing what they can in the interim to facilitate safe pedestrian movement, which I think is another huge step, because proximity doesn't guarantee anything, right? You can live 25 feet from something, but if there's a wall or a virtual wall via a highway, you can't get to it comfortably. These are some of the new units that are developing in that Warfield area. And you can kind of see it's, 3-4 stories, retail on the first floor. If you look carefully, you can see some of the parking entrances, but they're pretty well hidden. These are kind of, mega block structures. The design breaks them up, I think, fairly nicely. They don't feel oppressive in real life.
Let's go ahead and talk about the transit component for a quick second, because you brought up a very important point about proximity. There are a number of ongoing projects in Howard County at present that begin to evaluate and implement improvements to transit access. Historically, transit has been located at or adjacent to the ring road, which surrounds the mall, but does not provide adequate access for passengers who are looking to transfer, or for people with disabilities, parents with younger children, anyone carrying a shopping bag. There is an ongoing effort as part of the regional transit plan for Central Maryland to investigate and develop a more functional transit hub that's co-located with other amenities. At present, the transit hub is in a parking lot at the mall, and the spaces where people have to wait for the bus aren't necessarily well lit, clean, comfortable. The ease of use is challenging, but there are ongoing projects that seek to address that, including something that I think Shane would be interested in hearing. The Statewide Transit Innovation Grant is investigating how to co-locate bus stops and make ADA improvements at numerous shared stops between RTA and MTA communities, and some of the private nonprofit and employer shuttles. So trying to bring everyone to the same table and make sure that the discussions being had aren't done in silos and that improvements equitably benefit the folks who need to use the service the most. But with it comes the question of, I can reach the bus stop, but I can't reach it safely or comfortably. And who is responsible for upgrading the sidewalk infrastructure or maintaining the path of travel? So that's something that I anticipate we'll end up facing too as we think through this plan a bit more.
So I have another question along with looking at transportation, which is there any models or understanding when you look at economic vitality, okay, as to, how much this redevelopment may be dependent on people coming into the area who aren't, in any of the immediate neighborhoods. I'm just wondering if we know what percentage of, activity is it relying on for these shops and this economic, activity to be sustainable and viable. I also, along with that, I'm curious, as we increase density, do we have any commitment to maintaining any open space and green space that may be impacted? So are we losing green space in this area? Are we gaining? What is the status of the green space as we increase this density?
Yeah, so take the open space question first. There's very little greenfield development in the entirety of this downtown plan that wasn't anticipated in the original, like, 1960s version of this. There's some, most of what's going on right now is redevelopment of surface parking lots or redevelopment of existing mall square footage, which has also been occurring, which you can kind of see here. So in this case, they developed a lifestyle center in Plaza. Aren't we all developing lifestyle centers at this point? I have a lifestyle center developing inside of my house. So if you guys want to come and visit, you can hang out. You can strike like yoga positions in the middle of it. I'll take your picture, put it up on my website. So the lifestyle center in Plaza is focused on kind of like, let's come and hang out, get a bite to eat, go to get a tattoo, whatever people do in their lifestyle. But the Sears redevelopment is and that lifestyle center actually included about 40,000 square foot of new development, but it was on surface parking lot. The Sears redevelopment just takes place completely within the old Sears building. And that was kind of it's called Main Event Entertainment. I don't know how viable that is, but as of 2018, it had bowling alley, arcade, and I think 2 bars, if I recall correctly. That was also not using any more, green space. Now we're going to see in about 5 minutes, there's some greenfield development in an area known as the Crescent, which was anticipated to be developed 50 odd years ago. And there's some I guess you could call it development in something called Merriweather Park or Symphony Woods. But it's, like a band shell. It's pathways. It's a food and drink type thing. It's not like massive greenfield. It's not like they're running out, hey, here's a farm, let's buy it, chew it up, terraform it, build a new building. It's really, I think, in the best sense and in the true sense of the word, kind of redevelopment. In terms of the transportation thing, interestingly, the plan comes out in 2010, and we are just completing the 2020 census. Part of that census will include kind of commuting destinations, and it will be very interesting to look at the census tract or block, I get those two confused, for this area and compare to 2010 to kind of see if they're capturing more of the kind of internal trips or localized trips. The people who are working at these places are likely coming from outside of the county as well as inside of the county. And I think the average income of Columbia residents let you know immediately that a fair number of them are working at places like Tenable and PNC and Merrill Lynch, and so the former Merrill Lynch, and some of the other kind of office and employment users here in the town center. But as to like exact numbers on that, I think the best we can do in terms of planning these areas is to kind of make an allowance make it possible for somebody to do that. Tracking it over time is going to be critical for us as well as for Columbia. Columbia has something that they instituted, I think, first in 2018, which is called the Downtown Columbia Monitoring Report. So every 5 years, they have to issue a report that kind of tracks their progress. We've talked about ways to best do that with livable Frederick, kind of county-wide, and we may need to be thinking about doing that for a place like South Frederick corridors so that we can track what's happening in terms of commuting patterns, who's living where, who's shopping where, who's working where. I think that those are all really good points, but I don't think we're going to get away from an economic or a job center like in Frederick County, where you're really going to be mostly limited to people in and around that neighborhood, at least for the time being. Still going to rely on kind of bringing in migration of employees, even if it's from the next neighborhood over. The lakefront core and the lakefront is another one of the neighborhoods in the town center. These are kind of combined. This is where I was talking about the kind of the wellness neighborhood being kind of conceptualized by the prime developer. This is on the far east side. It obviously, bounds the lake. The little motto for this neighborhood is bringing community to the water's edge. It's a mix of residential, office, hotel, medical, restaurants. There's a Whole Foods store that opened up about 5 or 6 years ago that's located in the original Rouse Company headquarters, designed by Frank Gehry. It's now a Whole Foods grocery store. This seems to be, this is kind of gives you a sense of what's out there now. The gray kind of shows you existing buildings. And maybe this gets to that greenfield question or comment a couple of minutes ago. You can kind of see, here's the existing roughly from about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And here's what's, the proposed plan. And really, it's all going on parking lots. I mean, I don't believe there's one bit that isn't either replaced immediately by another. There's a couple of little spots that are like these little public, maybe eighth of an acre public plaza areas, but they're replaced and added to and enhanced in these plans. So I think that's another important idea here. The same way that we look at proximity not necessarily equaling or being equivalent to access, just because we have an eighth of an acre of open space doesn't necessarily make it a good open space. And they seem to have taken that to heart. They're really kind of concentrating on different types of experiences, linking kind of the mega projects like, the Columbia-wide trail system to these little kind of pocket parks and plazas and these places where life can just happen. Here you can see kind of an existing, I think it's Google Earth. You can kind of see what's going on here along the lake. There's, a fair bit of development already in place. Here's that Whole Foods market down here. Here's the lakefront plaza and the fountain. It's kind of the public plaza, public open space. You have some new residential mixed use happening over here. And the Google imagery from 2019 actually shows some cranes. So there's actually earth moving on this spot and in this spot here as well. So development is active and underway. This project over here, if you can see my bouncing ball, is an 11-story mixed-use project. Includes office, retail, parking structure, and residential units. Here's another, sunset rendering. You can kind of see the mall. You see little pyramids over there. That's Columbia Mall. And then here's the lakefront area rendered out. Here's another one. This is kind of what would eventually kind of come to be based on their concept plans. And some of this has already been built or is currently under construction. This is a Google image from, I think, this this year, 2020, kind of shows this residential mixed-use project. A couple of the storefronts have been filled in, I understand, in the meantime. There's a nice aerial view. Here you're looking west. Here's the lake and the lakefront area. Here's the mall in the center of the image, and then those residential structures we talked about earlier on the far western side. But this gives you a really good idea of the scope of the town center. You can't even see all of it. It kind of keeps going off image here. But the final lakefront core area includes another 500 residential units, more retail and restaurant, 250,000 more of office space. I'll move through these last few neighborhoods relatively quickly. Symphony Overlook is kind of moving. It's a kind of the south central area of the downtown core of Columbia. There's already a fair amount of office buildings, PNC Bank and some others. And a couple of these spots are being redeveloped. The transit center I talked about earlier is being developed in this Symphony Overlook. So it's called Symphony Overlook because it's overlooking the little wooded area that's going to become a cultural park. It includes Meriwether Post Pavilion. So for those of you who attend live events, when we used to do those, remember that? Remember when we used to go and listen to music and be with other people? We could touch them, and oh man, it was set up. You could scream without a mask. It was great. So Meriwether Post is back. It's been renovated. But you see the Symphony Overlook. They look at this. This is kind of probably the least well-defined neighborhood in the entire downtown area. You could tell that there was a real struggle here as they tried to figure out what we do. And it's really kind of becoming a mixed bag of mixed use, office, and that transit center. The nice thing about the transit center, other than the fact that we'll also include some residential uses with it, is that it does actually make sense in terms of centrality. And because it's positioned well to serve the cultural park and Meriwether Post, as well as kind of the retail and commercial and employment areas, it's probably a decent spot to do something like that. And here's a kind of I think it's an older plan from a couple of years ago, the transit center. But basically right across this road on Little Patuxent Parkway is the whole Meriwether Post Cultural Park area. So Meriwether and the Symphony Woods, that's the southern part of the downtown area. So I think probably a lot of you have been here in, to one of the venues. If you haven't been to Meriwether Post, maybe you went to Toby's Dinner Theater. But anyway, they're taking the idea that Rouse had of a cultural park, a central park, something where people could go to not just for a paid concert, but to just go hang out. And they're building on that. So they're adding this whole idea of these other venues, kind of more informal, less formal, less caged performance spaces, an area called, all of them are called like the chrysalis, the butterfly, the caterpillar. No stink bug. I was really disappointed in that, but they take that as their kind of organizing theme, and they have a 7-phase development plan for the park, a couple of pieces of which are in place now, including the chrysalis. Here's Meriwether Post Pavilion being renovated a couple of years ago. They were at I think it's on the National Register now. Frank Gehry designed this as well. Pretty neat building, pretty cool idea, very 60s or 70s kind of in its incarnation. They were trying to save the structure, particularly the roof, and it actually collapsed. So they had to rebuild it, but they rebuilt it to Gary's plans, and they used all of the original wood up on the front. So maybe architectural fiends get to know that. But anyway, if you ever went to Meriwether Post, you probably parked in this field parking lot. It seemed to rain every time I went, and this was always a muddy mess. Well, that field parking lot is now part of a neighborhood called the Crescent. That's the chrysalis, by the way. The Crescent is the last of these developed areas, and this is the area that we, at least in part, you could consider greenfield development, though in the original plan, this was fully developed out. It's about 100 acres. It includes, the parking area for Meriwether Post. Received its final development plan approval in 2017, and the numbers are huge. 1.5 million square feet of office, 300,000 square feet of retail and restaurants, 2,300 residential units. A couple of the core office buildings and mixed-use projects have already been built. There's a cultural center being built in phase 7 or section 7, on the site of the former Toby's Dinner Theater. And they're putting in a new cultural arts center that'll include maker spaces, gallery spaces, and 200 affordable apartments as well. Here's a architectural response to that whole Symphony Woods area. And this addresses two things. It addresses how you take kind of a relatively high intensity employment area and you transition into something called Symphony Woods. You know, you probably don't want to have a big blocky facade. You need some way to kind of make that transition. Here they're doing it with kind of a boardwalk that walks through their on-site environmental site design stormwater management area, very naturalized. Kind of a neat idea and a nice approach to the development of this area. In terms of transportation, I've covered most of this. I won't kind of go over it again, but you know, transit center, some bike share, pedestrian bridge, that street framework, 3 new parking garages have been built. I think there's a 4th underway. And again, you're right. You know, Shane, that's kind of a mixed bag. It's like kissing your sister, I guess, is the colloquialism there. Like, yeah, we're getting more parking, but yeah, we're getting more parking. On the environmental side, all downtown development needs to meet Howard County green building standards. They have quite a few LEED certified structures out there already. They're doing massive forest, stream, and lake restoration, more naturalized open spaces, you know, being brave and kind of allowing for things that aren't quite as kind of refined and cultured and maintenance heavy, making it easier to recycle and enhancing transit options where they can do that. So, you know, this is the ultimate vision for this place. You know, something looking more like this and less like the Columbia that we all know and love to get lost in. And, you know, I think they're well on their way to doing it. There's definitely economic energy. There's developer interest. Helps that the mall area itself is under, you know, single ownership. But once you move away from the mall area, it becomes splintered ownership, just like anywhere else in the country. You got some other plans that have been created in the meantime. There's a downtown-wide design guideline framework, the 5 neighborhood plans as well. A lot of good energy, a lot of good activity down there. I think it's a good model for us to learn from, both on the positive and the negative side. You know, our market, I think, is different than Columbia because of our location primarily. But it's worthwhile noting that the marketplace for these kinds of spaces is pretty hot. And we can be emboldened to think about the kinds of places that we feel we want to have in Frederick County and aspire to build those places. Odds are that if they're places that we want to be, they're places that other people want to be as well. And you know, short of the analysis that came through in the Livable Frederick Master Plan project, I think that pans out in the Columbia Development Plan. How are we doing on time, John?
Sorry, had to unmute. So it's 2 o'clock. We're blocked. We have a 2-hour block for the meeting, so we have 1 more hour left. So, you know, unless there's any objection, we can move on to Mosaic and go from there.
Could I have a question, please?
Sure,
yep.
Absolutely.
Earlier in your presentation, Dennis, you mentioned the dedicated funds for affordable housing. A couple questions about that. I think I understood you to say that they're charging a fee based on square footage of commercial. Was that correct?
Yes, that's the way I understand it.
And do you know what happens with those funds specifically? Does it go into a housing initiative fund like we have in Frederick County or something like that?
It does. It goes into forgive me for not knowing the details. I kind of glossed over the paragraph.
That's okay.
I just looked at it last night because it was something that popped up from notes many months ago. Yeah, it does go. There's I won't call it a housing authority, but it might be their legal housing authority. And it is a fund, and it sounded like, from my memory of the reading of that paragraph, that it could be used in a broad array of techniques. So it wasn't simply focused on building units. It looked like it could be used for programming affordability as well, which I think is a good. I personally, editorializing here, think that's a great model. It's important, we need to build units. That's clear. They also have, MPDU equivalent out here as well, the 12 or 13%. And you see a lot of the residential projects that are going up do have those affordable components. And you have some of the projects that are being co-located with other things like that transit center or the cultural arts center. They both have residential components, and they're not simply making all of the units kind of affordable. They're in most cases they're referring to them as mixed income, which I think is also a positive approach to it, so that you can avoid kind of the economic segregation by geography and by project. But it's a good, Mark, I would definitely look at it more closely. There's a lot of information on the Howard County website.
Okay.
If you have any problems finding it, let me know, and I can kind of point you in some directions.
Yeah, because as John knows, in another group he and I are working on regarding the MPDU ordinance, one of the things we're looking at is a linkage fee that might be assessed to commercial property and or residential. So that kind of got my attention when you mentioned that.
It did not seem like, based on the numbers, overall development for this area, the amount it was a per square foot assessment, an annual assessment. It did not seem to be a lot. Yeah. I mean, of course, I'm not owning and leasing a building, so it's not for me to say that. But, it seemed like it was at a scale that was very manageable, and yet would be very impactful in terms of helping, gain some momentum for some projects that might not otherwise be able to move.
Okay, thank you.
I just want a real quick question, and I'm not saying this needs to be a presentation, but I've witnessed myself a number of redevelopments, some successful, some not, and moving from different kinds of structural approaches in an area and changing that to try to, make it more vital, more sustainable. So I just, and sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't. So one of the components also is sort of the economic development plan, right? That goes along or accompanies or tries to support, the reimagining and redevelopment of an area. Is it possible to get something like that, or any kind of summary that exists that can be circulated to us for these areas that we're looking at? I think that would be an important factor to at least be exposed to.
Yeah, I mean, I can work with John to kind of come up with something. I agree. There are a lot of redevelopment projects. I mean, there are even a lot in our area. If you start to think through just kind of mall redevelopment, you've got a handful within an hour of where we sit that we can look for. Landmark Mall, White Flint come to mind right now. The Columbia Mall obviously is undergoing its redevelopment. Our own Fredericktown Center, or Fredericktown Mall, rather, it's kind of undergoing the same thing. These projects are all over the place at that scale. And the Mosaic District, which we'll look at in a minute, also does that, redeveloping kind of an old strip center. Parole, we looked at. One of the first to do this was a project called Mashpee Commons in Mashpee, Massachusetts. And I want to say that one started back in the 80s or very, very early 90s. And it was a kind of innovative idea at the time to kind of take an existing project and kind of rethink it. One critical thing you see, and this is maybe kind of part of what you were getting at, is when you have that corporate backing, when you have that support, both in spirit and in, capital, these plans can happen a lot more quickly. I would say that you have to, you can't do just one approach, right? It has to be structural. It has to be kind of legal. It has to be kind of social and behavioral. Any single sided or single colored approach to redevelopment is not likely to work unless you have one motivated landowner, which is the case with the Mosaic District, where you basically have one development company controlling the whole thing. So, you know, that's either it's a binary, right? It's either happening or it's not happening. But something where you have more than one user, more than one owner, much more complicated mix, and makes everything you do much more, has to be much more thoughtful in order to kind of make that work. Faith, if you want to, if that was Faith talking, I can't read my screen. If you want to just send John or me a quick email, kind of a reminder, and flesh out anything you'd like to see in something like that, I think we could put something together kind of quickly. There are some interesting case studies, case examples in the area that I think are worth looking at, both as successes and failures. You know, we talked about Rockville, I think, before, Rockville Town Center area. That's an interesting one to look at in the larger scope of history. If you start that story in, like, you know, the 1980s, it's one story. If you start it in 1963, it's an entirely different story. And that goes for a lot of redevelopment projects in our area. We have a lot of turnover here, huge economic engine, blah, blah, blah. You all know this. So redevelopment can happen on a generational basis. Even places like Kentlands, you know, kind of a notable kind of new town in Gaithersburg, you know, that's even gone through a couple of renovations already. I mean, you know, even despite the fact I'm bald, you know, when I was in college, that thing was, you know, I was at the charrettes for that project. I remember it being a farm. I remember it being fields. It's already like a second or third iteration. So nothing is ever done. Jim Rouse was like famous for saying this. People would ask him when his project was going to be done, and he would say, "I hope it's never done." You know, that was his kind of cute answer to that. But there's a real truth in that. It isn't ever done. What you're looking for is enough momentum to make the thing kind of coalesce, so that people recognize it as a place, or a project, or an area, or a neighborhood.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. And in fact, your citing Rockville is one of the things that you know, I was thinking about, because there are struggles with, you know, the new redevelopment today. So yeah. So it'd be worth looking at, you know.
Agreed.
Speaking to his Faith point about looking at this from a more balanced perspective, and I don't know if this is kind of what you do in terms of how you look at the land use development, but do you kind of do any kind of like weighted score to kind of give you a sense of how one can prioritize? You got a landowner that's really happy, more than happy to work with you, to go ahead and say, I love it. But you have another landowner, it's kind of like, kind of mix, and maybe it'd be great for a certain concept, but because they're not on board, do you go ahead and try to balance that in terms of what makes sense from a prioritization perspective?
Yeah, and John can speak to actually, you know, probably a lot of us in the group can speak to this. A lot of times projects kind of emerge or redevelopment plans emerge because a key owner or a group of owners is ready and willing to move and do something. And that spurs kind of the public or the community end of things. I think in this particular area, we have like this constant turnover of projects and redevelopment that's happening. I don't think we have any one project that's really kind of pushing South Frederick Corridors area. Would there be a project that could do? I mean, we've talked about the mall before. You know, if we had a landowner coming forward wanting to move more quickly, that might shift our implementation effort a little bit kind of going forward. It might influence how we look at the plan when we're at this level. I think it's more on the implementation side, and it's absolutely one of the components you have to consider, along with, you know, timing, who the players are going to be in a redevelopment plan, the physical geography. You know, if you have two landowners who are willing to do something and they are at like far ends of a planning area, you have to really start thinking about like what you can do on the public sector side to kind of effectuate that change. Are you better off kind of focusing on one area first and prioritizing that way, or kind of trying to spread the love a little bit? It is a factor, most definitely, and it's something that we'll be looking closely at, I think, as well. Let me go ahead and launch into the Mosaic thing. This is a much shorter presentation. Mosaic District, which you may or may not be aware of, it's Fairfax County. You can kind of see the little Washington Post locator map. Thank you, Washington Post. Kind of shows you the relative, location relative to DC. It's about 13 miles as the crow flies from kind of the Washington Monument. Put that in perspective. It's a few miles from Tyson's, just a few miles from Reston. It's in a very interesting place in the Northern Virginia kind of universe. And you can see from the map here, you've got a metro station at Dunloring. You got 495, you got the Beltway, Route 50, Route 29, all the big players in that part of Northern Virginia in terms of the transportation network are kind of present. And for that reason, this area became quite interesting to the Edens Development Company way back in the 1990s. It was originally this area that's now, technically it's Merrifield or Merrifield. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. John, do you know you're a Northern Virginia guy? Let's just call it Merrifield. Merrifield. It was kind of these are not my words, so I'm quoting other people. So if any of you are kind of hometown Merrifield people, don't take offense. But it was kind of considered kind of a wasteland of light industrial, strip shopping centers, garden centers, self-storage. You guys kind of get the picture here. And it was anchored by a drive-in theater that developed, I think, in the very late 50s. The Lee Highway Drive-In Theater. And man, I want to go see King Richard and the Crusaders in CinemaScope. I bet that's good. So this was developed as an area, from the 50s to the 80s, and it was kind of haphazard. There's not a lot of planning. And this will be my sole dig on Virginia. There was not a lot of good planning going on up until the 1980s in Northern Virginia anyway, but there was even less of it in this particular area, and it showed. So because of its underlying, its bones, right? It's close to DC. It's close to the metro system, a piece of infrastructure that was already, in place. It just made it kind of magical. I think the Edens Company has a quote how that when they looked at the market for this place, they realized, they had like millions of square feet of Class A office space within a few miles of the place, hundreds of thousands of residents with a, very high average household income. And they were like, let's do something with this. So the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors included a Merrifield revitalization in their 1998 comprehensive planning document. That kind of kickstarted the formal public sector plan part of this. It was one of the 7 revitalization areas that they located in the county. The Edens Company, very excited by this, developed a little mixed-use plan for about 27 acres right dead in the center. And you can kind of see it. It's in the deep red and this light yellow color by my bouncing ball. And they said, hey, 27 acres, we can do a lot with that. So they developed a plan. The plan was finished up in 2006, which was the worst possible timing for a big mixed-use project that had housing as a major component, particularly multifamily, because there was like zero capital for multifamily housing by the time the recession hit. So they kind of shelved that plan, took a deep breath, came back a few years later with a new plan that looked at this kind of downtown-ish redevelopment of the 27 acres that they had originally purchased. And in the subsequent years, they had purchased another 5 acres from an adjoining landowner, which meant that they had complete control over the development of 32 acres and multiple access points into the local road network as well. So in 2009, their plan for that area was approved along with a CDA, which would allow them to kind of forward fund infrastructure costs that could be recouped through taxing later on. Another important tool that is often used by these types of developments. There was also heavy coordination with VDOT, Virginia's Department of Transportation, on localized highway improvements. So there was good coordination between the county and the state highway folks for the road improvements necessary to make this work. And that was a key thing that keeps popping up in a lot of the analysis of this project. 2012, the developers' focus on design excellence really kind of paid off because obviously the money is important and we all do things to make money, but what it really comes down to is everybody wants that coveted National Capital Area American Planning Association Award for design excellence. And they got that. They scored that sucker in 2012. And that was reflective of the fact that they put a lot of effort into the design. They thought it through. They thought about ways to allow the design to be managed and regulated, as well as to let the happy accidents occur. And one important thing they did is they basically gave each of the kind of the keystone projects in this redevelopment to a different architect. So they would just naturally get kind of a slight difference in approach to the actual physical design of the buildings in the place. And when you see the photos of the buildings, or if you go there in person, that's immediately noticeable. I mean, there's a lot of similarity in materials because all of this is built within a fairly confined period of time. But the design approaches are all over the place, and it makes it much more interesting than if it had been, in my view, a single developer, a single construction project. They did use one coordinating site engineer, which was for if you have control over an entire area of development, you have to have some organizing personage. And like, what the hell? Why not an engineer? They're good at that kind of stuff. So they have a coordinating site engineer, but otherwise, a lot of it is left up to the individual architects. This image on the left is their comprehensive plan map, and the Mosaic District doesn't even really kind of show distinctively. It's kind of a area in between that dark red cherry, candy apple red, and the weird pockmarked yellow, but it's right in there. Relatively small piece of ground in a larger planning area. And you can see here on the zoning map on the right that the zoning that they're using are basically two zones. One is kind of a generic mixed use zone, which is that purple, and the dark brown, I think, which is kind of a high density residential. And they basically, using those two zoning districts, were able to accomplish most or much of what they needed to do to construct the project. So, the zoning doesn't have to be complex. I think the takeaway is, zoning doesn't have to be necessarily complex. How you have people move through the development project and utilize other regulating plans or other tools can help get you to, a different level of accomplishment. This is largely conventional zoning, and I use the word hand of God design control because at the end of the day, Eden's company exercised final kind of design veto. So there was that kind of, that hand working in the background. I should probably use the Latin. Here's some quick funny facts about Merrifield. So the whole Merrifield planning area is about 775 acres. So now we're talking about a scale that's closer to what we're dealing with. But the Mosaic District itself is kind of this little sub area within it. And again, that's only like 32 acres. But I mean, look at the numbers on this thing. This area has a population of 10,000 people, immediately adjacent to a metro station and a huge median household income of $91,000 is actually higher than that now. Median age of 33, that's pretty young. It's on the young side. Highly educated. This Mosaic project is clearly geared towards kind of young professionals with kids, well paid. And you see that in the way it's marketed, in the kinds of experiences that they portray in the marketing of the Mosaic District itself. Huge amount of, consumer spending, free dollars to spend. Really kind of amazing. It's serving as an anchor for the redevelopment. You see other redevelopment projects now starting to build on the energy of the Mosaic District, and that's a good takeaway for us. You can get one good project, one good core project can help inspire other landowners to think similarly. And to get to Faith's implications earlier, the opposite is true. A bad project can really take the steam out of the momentum of the redevelopment of an area. Though it's America, capitalism rules. So at the end of the day, somebody's massive failure is somebody else's huge opportunity. So, here's a nice comparison shot, right? Here's the drive-in theater. For those of you too young to know what that looks like in an aerial photograph, it looks like aliens have landed. There's probably a metal monolith down there too from Utah. That's 1960. So you can kind of see Merrifield's a really rural place in 1960, and here we are in 2017, and it's kind of a Back to the Future moment. The Twin Pines Mall has now, kind of replaced the old farm, and here's the Mosaic District, kind of anchoring the center of this redeveloped area at the intersections of these major thoroughfares in Northern Virginia. Here's a nice little project summary that's a little more up to date. You can kind of see the numbers here: 500,000 square feet of retail and restaurant. I think it's up to like 200,000 square feet of office. A lot of hotel space, over 1,000 units of residential at this point. Townhouses, apartments, condos. It's kind of a big mix. Shane, for you, they've delivered 2,420 parking spaces. I love the fact that they've delivered them. That makes it so much more special. So yeah, there you go. There's some of the numbers, varying numbers that are floating out there. But you get a good image of what's going on out there. This is kind of their main public plaza. It's all of this has been built within a decade, so it looks new, it looks engineered. But think of this in 20 years or 40 years or 60 years. It's not going to look. People are not going to sit down in this park and go, "Wow, this was all built," right away. I mean, things will change, things will evolve. Angelica Film Theater and Cafe, which I imagine will reopen at some point in the spring when we're past our moment. But there's a Target. There's like 170,000 square foot Target store, like basically in an urbanized area. This little thing in the foreground is a coffee shop. You can see some of the stuff under construction here across the street, the street front retail and restaurants. A lot of healthy street life going on. And guess what? I bet the last 6 or 7 months, I bet a lot of these restaurants have done pretty good because they do have cafe seating, outdoor seating, which I'm sure helped immensely to kind of weather our storm here. Most of these are marketing images. I did not float 25 feet above the stores. Well, okay, I did, but these are their marketing images. So you can kind of see what they're going for. The people are blurry, not because they have bad cameras, but because it's an action shot. People are moving, they're doing things, they're going places, they're getting something to eat, they're gonna go listen to a concert. They have a big screen, a big LED screen in their public plaza, which they call Lucy, which I think is an allusion to Lucy in the Sky. It's like 22 by 38 feet. I mean, it's a big LED screen. They show movies, they do stuff there. So they make it, they've done what they can to kind of invite people into these spaces and let them have fun while they're out there. Again, is this an everyday place for 95% of the population? Probably not. But there are plenty of neighborhoods surrounding the Mosaic District that can utilize this central area. Shane, were you going to say something?
Yeah, we can ask you with the concept behind the digital screen, with the same thing that they do at the National Harbor. They have a big screen there, and sometimes they show a football game or a movie. They use it as a family night to kind of just encourage people to come to National Harbor to spend a day.
I think so. Yeah, minus the gambling, I think it's a very similar idea. And again, I tried to get somebody on the phone to ask how that was playing out over the summer. I imagine pretty well. Given the social distancing, you can, if you can't go to a movie inside, you can definitely go check it out on a Friday night with your kids or whatever, or Saturday early evening. But yeah, the same idea, kind of inviting activity, helping a place to look lived in. Again, more marketing photos, which I just love. And so to some extent, it's also kind of doing what downtown Frederick does for us, right? So they've got like the live cultural events. You've got the farmers market. This is absent in this particular part of Northern Virginia. So they're they're creating it fresh. We don't necessarily have to do that, but I think it's really important for us to think through when we look and conceive of a plan for the South Frederick corridors. How do we do things that are interesting and serviceable and maintainable that do not necessarily detract from what we have to offer in downtown Frederick? Because we don't want to do that. We don't want to cannibalize the good energy that we already have. But clearly there are some things that are neighborhood focused. And perhaps some of that neighborhood focus is what we learn from these sharp, glossy marketing photos. This is also from the Mosaic website, farmers market. Again, we do a lot of this. This is a lot of their housing. You go to the website and it's like sold out. Sorry, nothing left. Because they're a good deal for $1 million. 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom townhouse. That's a steal, right? 13 miles from the Washington Monument, but clearly not affordable to a lot of people in the DC region. So this project is not to be held up as an exemplar for broadening housing opportunity. I can say that when I was teaching at University of Maryland, I had a couple of students in 2 different classes that lived in the Mosaic district. So, and they were not independently wealthy kids. So there's something affordable out there. I think I saw a number of you can get a 1-bedroom apartment for less than $2,000. So it kind of puts it in perspective a little bit. And here you can kind of see what they're doing with in terms of what they're doing with the residential stuff. It's playful architecture. It's very colorful, very alive, very much of its time. Again, we'll see what this looks like in 25 or 50 years. But right now, it's very alive and very energetic, and I think it's attractive to people in that way. From the design standpoint, there aren't any really boring moments in the Mosaic district. Everything is designed to entice you to that next corner. It's marketing 101 basically, but it's doing it through public design that also serves the function of creating really fun places that people might actually want to be. And again, you see, street markets, flea markets, art shows. These things are right in the middle of the street. That's a good sign, right? It's like a block party. There's clearly not moving traffic on that little block in the Mosaic district at that moment. So again, caters to young professionals. Yeah, there you go. Average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment is $1,900. 4-bedroom townhouse for $900,000. The range goes up to about $1 million. You got some pocket change. You might want to go buy a house down here, sell it again in a year. Here's some of the basics for the area. Close by Tyson's, direct access to the Beltway, further enhanced by the Beltway improvements, by the way, with the toll lanes and the managed lanes. This whole Mosaic district, so any of the cynicism that may have leaked out of my presentation, I want to temper that with the fact that it's got LEED neighborhood certification, which is not an easy certification to do for a neighborhood of the scale. It's in very high demand, and I think that speaks volumes about its marketability. So that's Mosaic kind of in a nutshell. If any of you are bored and you're looking for a socially distanced thing to do, you can always drive down to Merrifield, Virginia, and just drive through the Mosaic district without getting out of your car this winter. But when things do open up, maybe worth a trip to go see what a 22 by 38 foot LED screen looks like on a Friday night in July.
That's awesome, Dennis. Thank you. Do we have any questions about that at this point?
Just a side question. Do you know how much this area is going to be impacted by Amazon moving in, and how much it's really spiked the interest of this area?
I think what I was reading earlier is that yes, it has an impact, a continuing impact on housing in particular. My guess is that, again, with the 2020 census and any of the income quantifiers we get, we're going to see that bump up kind of ahead of other areas in Northern Virginia even. Amazon's such a huge player that it's having ripple effects throughout the region. But clearly this is having an impact. I can't remember now where I saw it because I read a lot of material the last couple of weeks. I want to say that there was an analysis from a real estate kind of guru guy in Northern Virginia who was talking about it, but he was presenting, it wasn't just his opinion. He was presenting kind of quantifiable data. It has had an impact, and my guess is that you'll continue to see that on the housing side, obviously kind of bolstering, keeping housing prices relatively elevated, but also maybe, allowing for the opportunity for more projects like this where people are comfortable living near a transit stop. There's like I don't think I put this in the presentation, but there's a free circulator bus from the Dunloring metro station, which again is a no-brainer. It's less than a mile, so it's not necessarily a comfortable walk for many people, but for a lot of people it is. But if you don't want to walk it or you can't walk it, they do have these free circulator buses. I think they're like the little microbuses, but they're developing an autonomous bus system like National Harbor, to use that parallel again. And I think that plan just got hatched in early 2020. So I don't know that there's any autonomous vehicles running out there yet, but that, I'm guessing, would be very soon.
Okay. It's 2:35, and I wanted to stop at 2:50 to check public input to see if we had any comment. And we had a third option, the Meriden Green project in Connecticut, which I can have a short presentation, which I think I can kind of squeeze in here. I think I can do it in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into that. Okay, so I thought that the Meriden Green redevelopment project would be interesting because in the South Frederick corridors, if we're looking at higher density residential, then it's also very important to think about the open space amenities that are provided in conjunction with that. And in this area, there may be some opportunities to kind of leverage the provision of these kind of park amenities with some existing features that offer stormwater management, so that you could kind of double up or leverage stormwater with park facilities. And this is kind of a common approach. Baker Park is a very near example of this kind of thing. And if we look at this stormwater management, community stormwater management feature that already exists in the area along Industry Lane, I would think it's not really hard to imagine that this could provide that kind of opportunity. So the Meriden Green project is kind of along these lines. The Meriden Green is located in downtown Meriden, Connecticut, and it's a 14-acre park, and that serves also as an economic development project, but also as a functions as a flood control infrastructure. So the town of Meriden is located between Hartford to the north and New Haven to the south, and it's a city of about 60,000 people. And the Meriden Green project is a redevelopment project, but it's also kind of a piece of a larger master plan that's about managing flood control issues along Harbor Brook, which is highlighted here in the blue, which runs through the city and also through the Meriden Green site. So flooding along Harbor Brook was a big problem, and the city wanted to find ways to mitigate this in order to promote economic development, protect health, safety, and welfare. So in order to qualify for state funding related to this flood control objective along Harbor Brook, under the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act, the city of Meriden is required to complete an environmental impact evaluation. And the Meriden Green Project is a key piece of the flood control strategy described in this plan. And it's also a key component, like I mentioned, of Meriden's downtown economic development plan. Before the redevelopment, the 14-acre site was a center of industrial and commercial activity, and it was referred to as the hub. And a significant user among others was a company called International Silver Corporation, which kind of contributed to and resulted in some brownfields issues on the property. So the site became abandoned over time. Then the city was awarded almost $3 million in federal and state funds. That was also matched by local sources. And that allowed them to assess environmental damage at the site, to demolish the commercial buildings that were there, clear the site, mitigate the site, and then work with the community to develop a site reuse plan. So the Hub Site Reuse Committee was formed. They focused on kind of three elements. They wanted to, first of all, define a very clear vision for the site. They wanted to pursue different funding mechanisms. And then they wanted to make sure that there were dedicated people involved that could shepherd the projects through and make sure that it would get implemented. So the first aspect of the plan was that they would daylight Harbor Brook and restore the brook and construct a town green around that, which also had this dual purpose, like I mentioned, of serving as a flood storage area. And this entire block redevelopment includes green space. There are actually 600 new residential units as a part of this, and 60,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space, which is all located near an existing train station where a new Amtrak service will stop between New York City and Springfield, Massachusetts. So this project was completed and opened to the public in 2016. And some of the related themes, I think, for us with South Frederick in this project are the idea of using park space as a catalyst for economic development, and also the idea of combining stormwater infrastructure with active recreational space. So that's it, short and sweet. I just wanted to share that and put it out there as a point of reference. Now I think do we have any comment or questions at this point? All right, well, I'm going to throw it over to public input. And if anybody online, we have one caller. If anybody would like to comment, please enter the queue by hitting *3. You know what, just to be sure, whoever is on the public line, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you just to ask you personally if you have any comment, because I'm concerned that the queue might not be working. So I'm unmuting you. Hello, are you there? Caller, are you there?
Hey, John.
Hey, Eric. Any comment, bud?
Now that I'm on, sorry, because it was interesting. I was watching on YouTube and it's delayed and not on the phone, but now I'm on the phone. So I guess when you do take comment, make sure you have a pause there. I think these were good. I appreciate. I think it's a different perspective of some of the projects and how long they take, and I like that Dennis talked about. I guess for lack of a better term, it's incremental redevelopment, and I think that's what I just want to stress is some of these things take time. It's the third, fourth, fifth iteration of development that occurs. And I think he was mentioning Kentlands, Lakelands at one point, and just for point of reference, that's the project when I was at City Gaithersburg, worked on. And even though that was sort of a green field, even when that was being developed, like the commercial area, it was set up in such a way that we knew that it was going to be an opportunity for basically infill, meaning the water, sewer, some of the major utilities were set in place, even on the large pavement area for like where the Kmart was and things like that. And if you go there today, if you go back and look at the aerials from originally from that commercial core, and then you go there today, you can kind of just see the bones and the structure of it. So I think those are the things, particularly in a redeveloped corridor like this, even though it's not greenfield, that can be done and can be recognized is you're going to have an initial iteration of redevelopment, but then you can set it up so as long as the public policy and the regulations align with that for the next iteration. Because again, look how long it took for Columbia to emerge as it did. But no, I just really appreciate the broad look at some of these things, and I'll be quiet.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Anybody else?
Dennis had mentioned earlier about how the census information is sometimes used to go ahead and either confirm your understanding of where the county is going in the future or to make an adjustment along the way. I don't know when the 2020 census information will be available, but how much are you going to try to use that information to help to understand what the nature of our county might be going? Are we getting more toward people who are moving to Frederick County to work in Frederick County, or are we still serving a strong base of people who travel for work to DC, to Baltimore, and trying to meet those needs as well?
Well, I think that, at this point, we're not going to do a comprehensive reassessment of the 2020 data and may try to look at that relative to specific issues that might come up. We certainly will be looking into the 2020 data, trying to get an understanding of it, but relative to this project, we're not going to kind of do a reanalysis of that, maybe kind of just focus more on specific issues.
Thank you.
So, anyone else?
Jamie.
I just wanted to say quickly, thank you for including the Meriden example, because I think it was kind of unique, and not that we're going to face anything exactly like that, but we do have a lot of, light industrial types of things going on in this corridor, and so thinking about that was a good example to show us.
Yep. Jamie?
I'd love to have someone from Howard County speak about some of the roadblocks that they've encountered as they're working through this plan. Certainly, we'll face a lot of similar challenges, and if they can guide us along the path to not making the same mistakes they had, it could save us time and money.
Yeah, that's a great point. We can certainly reach out to them and maybe have a discussion with them that we can then communicate to you guys, or even have him come give a presentation. We'll have to look at what our future agendas are. But yeah, it's a good point.
John, if I could, I just want to stress how helpful I find this exercise. I know it takes a lot of time to pull these resources together and for you guys to come up to speed enough to share with us. But I have to tell you, from my perspective, this takes a sometimes complicated thought process and kind of brings it into the real. So I don't know about everybody else, but for me, this is incredibly helpful. And I really appreciate all the time, the obvious time that's gone into putting this together for us. I think it's going to make our future discussion so much more productive because it's now going to be based on kind of a level playing field and common understanding. So great work.
Thank you for saying that, Rick, because, one of the anxieties I think we have is we don't want to be too repetitive or too, we want to make sure the information is relevant, and it's kind of a hard balance to find because we're not totally aware of everyone's background. So I appreciate that you said that. Thank you. Okay. Well, for our next meeting, my plan is, assuming I can get this produced, is to give an overview of a more detailed outline of a proposed draft plan document, like really get into some of the details of the structure of the document. And then for the following meeting on December 28th, I thought maybe we could do a gift exchange. Haha, just kidding. I thought maybe we could not meet then, given that it's in the middle of the holiday season. Right. And maybe we could just pick up on the following meeting, which would be January 11th, unless there's any objection, speaks now. So I'll outline all of that in an email. And so we'll have our next meeting be on the 14th. We'll skip the 28th and we'll get back together on the 11th. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys for your time, attention, input. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you again. This was really helpful. Really appreciated it. You guys take care.
Take care.